Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks again for the opportunity to present at the conference this year. I'm going to speak about the General Walker shooting incident. The presentation's called Reasons to Doubt Lee Harvey Oswald's Involvement. I understand that Stuart did a presentation yesterday on General Walker in the far right, so hopefully there's not too much duplication with what I'm about to go over here. Over the years, it seemed to me that this case was largely presented as a fait accompli. It was Oswald and he did it. There's nothing more to see. Marina said Lee admitted to her that he took the shot at Walker. There was the incriminating Russian language note that she found that was allegedly written by Lee. There was a bullet found, photographs found amongst Oswald's possessions, including of Walker's house. It all seemed kind of pretty damning stuff. But just like the JFK assassination and the murder of Officer Tippett, I found that the more you dig into the case, the more you find information and evidence that would cast doubt on the official version of events and Oswald's involvement. So I don't pretend to know all the facts about what happened on the night of April 10, 1963, but I do think it's important that we hear all the evidence. My objective in this presentation is simply to highlight some information that has perhaps flown under the radar a little bit. So this is what are generally known as the facts of this case. Walker was at home at 4011 Turtle Creek Boulevard in Dallas. He had actually only returned home a few days earlier from a 6-week speaking tour of the US with a right-wing preacher, Billy James Hargis. And Walker was sitting in a ground floor room at the back of the house, working on his income tax returns. The evening of April 10th, 1963, and at around 9 p.m, there was a loud blast and a bullet crashed into the house. Walker's first thought was that it was perhaps a firecracker. He quickly realised it was the crack of a rifle shot. The bullet had deflected off the window frame, which changed its trajectory, and this intervention perhaps saved Walker's life. He only received superficial wounds to his right arm, possibly caused by fragments of the bullets. Police were called, and they determined that the shot was fired from a lattice fence that bordered the backyard of Walker's property with an alley that ran behind it. The bullet travelled only around 35 to 40 yards, and there were no eyewitnesses who actually saw the shot being fired. The case essentially remained unsolved until after the murders of both JFK and Lee Oswald, when Oswald became the prime suspect. The Warren Commission pinned the crime on Oswald. He was a loner with a propensity for violence and political assassination, and that has been the mainstream narrative ever since. In this slide, it's just a couple of pieces of the evidence. On the left is Warren Commission Exhibit 1006, which is the window in Walker's house where the bullet entered. I've added the red square so you can see where the bullet deflected off the window frame. And on the right is Warren Commission Exhibit 1011, and this is the lattice fence out in the back alley from where the shot was fired. The police said that they found a small chipped edge of the top part of the fence, and this indicated to them that something had been laid on that spot quite recently, likely the rifle. A thorough search of the premises, though, revealed no spent cartridge or any other evidence of value, so whoever was responsible for the shot obviously went to great lengths on the night to cover their tracks. So, as I said earlier, the crime essentially remained unsolved until the finger of suspicion started pointing towards Lee Harvey Oswald about a week or so after his own murder at the hands of Jack Ruby. To the best of our knowledge, Oswald was never questioned about the crime or even considered a suspect. A TV reporter had briefly asked the Dallas Police Chief, Jesse Curry, the day after JFK had been shot, if there was a possible connection between the assassination and the firing at General Walker, but Curry did not know of any connection. But in the days and weeks that followed, the finger of suspicion started to point directly towards Lee Harvey Oswald. The eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that that isn't actually Lee Oswald. That's a man called William McEwen Duff. He was a person of interest to the Dallas Police Department in the days and the weeks, months that followed the Walker incident. This is a mugshot of Duff that was taken from an arrest made on the 18th of April, 1963, officially for swindle, but I think the Walker shooting was on the minds of the police. Walker actually had hired 2 private detectives to investigate Duff. Duff also was alleged to have been seen in the company of Lee Harvey Oswald and laid claim to seeing Jack Ruby at Walker's house more than once. So I did a presentation on Duff at last year's conference. So if you're interested in him and his story, please look that up on the YouTube channel. Just a few photographs that were allegedly found amongst Oswald's possessions after the JFK assassination. The picture on the left is of an alley running behind General Walker's house. And on the right of the slide, there are a number of pictures, but if I can draw your attention to the one in the bottom left, which is an image of the back of Walker's house. So these photos, amongst others, were said to have been taken by Oswald and were used to incriminate him, presented as evidence that he was planning to carry out an attempt on General Walker's life. So just in this next slide, on November the 29th, 1963, a West German newspaper published an article called Strange Case of Oswald. This was the first really serious attempt to suggest that Oswald had taken the shot at General Walker. I'm just going to read from the highlighted section in red there, and it says, the murderer of Kennedy made an attempt on US General Walker's life early in the summer when General Walker was sitting in his study. The bullet missed Walker's head only by inches. Oswald was seized. The following investigation, as it was reported, was stopped through the influence of the US Attorney General Robert Kennedy. If Oswald had been investigated, he eventually would have been in prison for many years, and so he would not have been in a position to commit the murder of Robert Kennedy's brother, John F. Kennedy. That's an FBI memo dated the 22nd of May, 1964. Now, I'm not going to get into here in this presentation the suggestion that Oswald had actually been seized for the shooting and that Robert Kennedy stopped any investigation. That does seem like an unlikely scenario, but it was something that General Walker believed right up until his own death. The article in the West German newspaper did seem to be based on 2 interviews that Walker gave to a journalist from the paper on the 23rd of November 63 and again the following day. Now, according to the transcript of these interviews, Walker did not actually make any connection between Oswald and the attempt on his own life. And he also denied to the Warren Commission that he had planted the seed about Oswald being the person who had taken the shot. The journalist, though, who interviewed Walker, did confirm to the FBI that Walker had told him during one of their telephone interviews that he did believe it was Oswald who had made the attempt. It could have been an off-the-record comment, but they pursued and went ahead with printing the story. And this article got a lot of interest, and it was really the beginning of the case starting to build against Oswald. The next major development really was the discovery of the note that was supposedly written by Oswald in Russian. It's displayed on the slide here as Commission Exhibit 1 with the English translation underneath. We were told that this note was written by Oswald and it was found by Marina on the night of the Walker shooting. She testified that she had gone into his private room when she became worried as he had not returned home at his usual time that evening, and it was in the room that she found this note. He also said that when he eventually got home, he confessed that he had taken the shot at General Walker. And it's a kind of farewell letter with instructions on what she should do if he was arrested and taken prisoner or worse. And on the face of it, it does seem like a very incriminating piece of evidence, but there are a few things that we should note about it. One, it's not signed or dated. It does not mention General Walker or any other specific incident. The note was found actually inside a book that Ruth Payne had taken along to the Irving Police Department on the 2nd of December 63 for them to pass on to Marina. And we should remember that the police had actually thoroughly searched Ruth Payne's house over 2 days on November the 22nd and the 23rd. And Ruth Payne even told the Warren Commission that she saw police officers, quote, leafing through books to see if anything fell out, end quote, but actually never found this note when they were doing that. The note was found only a few days after the publication of the article in the newspaper, and there was significant dissent amongst the handwriting experts on the House Select Committee in the 70s that raised doubt as to whether the handwriting was actually Lee Oswald's. And importantly, when Marina was first questioned about the note on the night of the 2nd of December 63, she actually denied any knowledge of it. But 24 hours later, her version of events had actually completely changed. Another problem with the note is seen on this slide. It's an FBI memorandum dated the 5th of December 1963 by an FBI fingerprints expert, Sebastian Latona. And after he had examined the note, and the memo says, a letter written in the Russian language by Lee Harvey Oswald was examined and 7 latent fingerprints were developed thereon. Latent prints are not identical with fingerprints of Lee Harvey Oswald or Marina Nikolaevna Oswald. Now, it's possible that any fingerprints left by the Oswalds had degraded so much on the letter that they could not be identified. I've read that fingerprints can be developed from porous substances like paper after many months or even longer. And the environmental conditions of the evidence are important in that respect. This note had allegedly been kept inside a book for around 8 months. I'd need to leave it up to fingerprint experts to debate whether fingerprints could still be retained on a piece of paper after 8 months. But what we do know is that Oswald's fingerprints were not found on the note. It's possible that the prints were lifted from investigators who had legitimately handled the note, but surely it would have been important to try and link the prints to those investigators who were known to have handled it. That could have solved the mystery pretty quickly, but we do not know if that was done and who the prints belonged to. Rather than try and solve that mystery, Latona's findings seem to have been just largely overlooked. Now, for the best part of 60 years, the note has always been interpreted as being only about the Walker incident. But I would like to speculate here that if the note was indeed written by Oswald, then it could have referred to another incident that has flown under the radar a lot in recent years. Most of us will know about Oswald's pro-Castro leafleting on the streets of New Orleans in August 63, but less know that he almost certainly did likewise on the streets of Dallas in April 1963. On the left there is a letter that Oswald sent to Vincent T. Lee in New York. He was essentially the head of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in America. Not very easy to see the writing, but it does say, "Dear sirs, I do not like to ask for something for nothing, but I am unemployed. Since I am unemployed, I stood yesterday for the first time in my life with a placard around my neck, passing out Fair Play for Cuba pamphlets, etc. I only had 15 or so. In 40 minutes, they were all gone. I was cursed as well as praised by some. My homemade placard said, 'Hands off Cuba, Viva Fidel.' I now ask for 40 or 50 more of the fine basic pamphlets." And we think the letter was sent around the 17th of April, so only about a week after the Walker incident. Now, 2 Dallas police officers witnessed this leafleting and wrote statements about it in May 64. They approached the man but he ran into the HL Green's department store and they decided not to pursue him. Whilst they both could not positively identify who it was, they both said he was a white male, medium build, and had on a white shirt. In all likelihood, the man that they saw was Lee Harvey Oswald. But only a week or so after the Walker shooting, Oswald was on the streets of Dallas handing out pro-Cuba leaflets, a pretty provocative and dangerous thing to do, given what had just happened, and that Dallas was a hotbed of right-wing politics at the time. Wouldn't it be more likely that he would keep his head down for a while if he had been involved in the Walker incident? And before the end of the month, Oswald had actually moved to New Orleans. I don't rule out that the note was written about the Walker incident. It could have been. I just think we need to be open-minded that it could have had another meaning, and that meaning could have been this leafleting incident in downtown Dallas. I want to move on now and talk about the best witness that we have in the Walker incident, and that was the 14-year-old Walter Kirk Coleman. He lived up not that far from Walker, and whilst he did not see who took the shot, he did hear it and witnessed two men in the church parking lot adjacent to Walker's only seconds later. He's a witness that is inconvenient to the theory that Oswald took the shot and acted alone. And we don't actually hear very much from Coleman, but I'm going to try and play a short excerpt from the 1993 PBS Frontline documentary, Who Was Lee Harvey Oswald, that included a short interview with Coleman. So see if I can get this to work.
We don't have any. We don't have any audio, Scott. Hello. Scott, can you hear us?
Is that not playing? No.
Yeah, hi Scott. It was playing, but there was no audio. Could you try and get that working? Take it back.
I'll have to the audio. It's always technical difficulties, isn't there?
There always is.
Yeah.
Maybe when you share the screen, you've got to click on the audio.
Sure why the audio's not coming on. Is that still no audio still?
There's still no audio. Tony, do you want to explain what
Well, I know that in Teams, there's when you share when you share in Teams, there's a little switch that you flick to turn on the sound. I'm not sure whether the same in Zoom.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that?
I did. I don't see that.
Do you want to stop sharing and then try to share again and see if there's an option for turning on the sound?
Yeah, I can try that.
Because everything else is turned on. You've done everything correctly. It's just that. I mean, I'm guessing that's what happened.
If you want, I can just. I mean, it's a very short video. I can just kind of talk to what he was saying.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay. I mean, I've got a next slide. I'm sorry that didn't play. I tested that earlier and it seemed to work. But yeah, I mean, basically what Coleman is saying there is, I'll just move on to the next slide. Yeah, I mean, this is basically a summary of what Coleman was. It's the only interview I've actually ever seen of Walter Kirk Coleman. And as I say, it is a very short video. So look up that on YouTube and you can catch it. But he's basically talking about the night of the shooting, obviously, and he was sitting in the back room of the house, and he heard what sounded like a shot. He left the house, went through into the back garden, and his sister's bike was laid up against a fence. So he stood on top of the bike. That meant he was able to look into the parking lot that was adjacent to Walker's house. He was actually interviewed by police on the 10th of April, and just some of those bullet points there. sitting in the back room of the house. He heard what sounded like a shot. He saw an unknown white male speed away from the church parking lot next to Walker's house in a 1949 or 1950 Ford. He then saw another man at a 1958 Chevrolet. The car was black with a white stripe down the side, and the man was leaning over as if he was putting something onto the floorboards. That's basically what Coleman was saying in that interview. He was interviewed again, and there's a supplementary police report on the slide there. He gives a little bit more information, but essentially it's the same. He thought it was a car blowout at first, but he ran out back, climbed the fence, saw the man getting into the car, and said that the man was middle-sized with long black hair. He then saw a second man at a second car. This was a Chevrolet. The car was black with a white stripe, and the man was bending over the front seat as if he was putting something in the back floorboard. I know that's quite difficult in a picture, so I did my best to, with the help of Google Maps, to try and do a little diagram to help with that. So we can see the blue arrow pointing towards what is the Walker house. And on the other side, where the green circle and arrow, that is the approximate location of the shooter and the direction of the shot. And the kind of gold line is the alley that was running behind Walker's house. Now, more importantly, the red area and the circle, that's the approximate location of Coleman. And he's kind of standing on his sister's bicycle, and he's looking over this fence, and he sees Mystery Man 1 at this 1949 50 Ford. And then just further down, but along the fence that bordered Walker's property, this is where he saw the second man. This is the man who seemed to be putting something into the back seat of the car at a 1958 Chevrolet. And just north of that is the rough location of where the church was located. Actually, Mystery Man 1, as he got in the car, glanced back and actually looked at Coleman. So whoever that man was, he must have known that he had been seen. Now, Coleman did provide a description of both men and what they were wearing. And this was actually in an FBI interview that he gave in June 1964. So it's over a year later. I don't really know what happened in the intervening, 12 months or so, but his evidence does seem to have been largely overlooked. But as I say, he was interviewed again by the FBI, and he provided a description of what the men were wearing. But he was very, very clear that neither man he saw that night was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Scott, can I just ask a question? In
Yeah.
this presentation, was there a link to that PBS YouTube video?
No, I didn't put a link in the...
All right, because obviously you sent me the presentation, which I can forward on to everybody anyway, but so they'll have to search for that separately.
Yeah, okay. Moving on, just a couple of other slides here about Coleman's, what he saw. These are Warren Commission exhibits, 1953C and 1953D. The one on the left, 1953C, the red square, I've added these squares. The red squares where Coleman was standing looking over the fence. In the kind of gold orange square, that is where he saw the man at the 1949, 1950 Ford. And on the right, the kind of yellow box, a bit further down is where he saw the other car, which was the Chevrolet. On the right, there again, the red number 2 is where he first saw the man who's known as number 2. This is a man who ended up going down into the Chevrolet and was as if he was pushing something into the back seat. The B inside the yellow square is where that Chevrolet was parked, and the C inside the kind of gold square, you can just about see the entrance to the alley. So it's not that far really from the entrance to that alley, and the shop was really fired just a few feet inside there. So it's not a great distance for these men to have to travel. And Coleman is obviously, as we can see here, was very, very close to them. Now, something we can't rule out is that the men were there innocently. They heard a shot and it kind of spooked them, and they just tried to get away from the area as quickly as possible. But I think that's unlikely. They've never been identified, and they've certainly never came forward to tell what they saw, or even just eliminate themselves as suspects. So their presence does remain suspicious. I just wanted to highlight this section of an FBI report dated the 4th of June 1964, and in particular the comments made by the FBI agents Robert Barrett and Ivan Lee, who interviewed Coleman. They've basically said here, Coleman was requested to reenact his actions upon hearing the blast of what he first thought was a backfire on the night of April 10, 1963. It was personally observed by Special Agents Barrett and Lee that it required Coleman 2 seconds to go from where he was standing in a doorway to the stockade fence, a distance of about 14 feet. I might be interpreting this incorrectly, but it seems to me that what Barrett and Lee are perhaps trying to do is undermine the credibility of Coleman's recollection, saying that he got to his vantage point in only about 2 seconds. The suggestion being that the men he saw could not have got from the location of the shooter, or even the alley entrance where Coleman first spotted him, in only 2 seconds. We should note that that same FBI report said that at the time Coleman heard the shot, he was standing in the doorway which leads from his bedroom to the outside of the house. So are these FBI agents actually being a little bit disingenuous? Wouldn't Coleman have, when he heard the shot, have to move from the doorway to the outside of the house and then the further distance to the fence? And I think that would have taken longer than 2 seconds. And we need to factor in his reaction time, because he would not have moved instantaneously. Remember that he first thought that the noise was a car backfire. So I think it's reasonable to conclude that it did take Coleman longer than 2 seconds to get to the fence. I estimate possibly closer to 10 seconds or somewhere in that region. And that gives the 2 men slightly more time to get to their positions where Coleman first saw them. I think this timing is important because of something we will discuss in the next few slides. The Robert Surrey encounter. Robert Surrey is an interesting person. He was an ally and a business associate of General Walker's, and Surrey was actually responsible for the Wanted for Treason leaflet that was distributed around Dallas in the days before JFK visited the city. According to his Warren Commission testimony, Surrey arrived at Walker's house around 15 minutes after the shot was fired. And when he was interviewed by the police on the night of the shooting, and then in the days that followed, Surrey told them a story about how he saw 2 men acting suspiciously around Walker's house on Saturday the 6th of April at around 9 p.m. He saw the 2 men sitting in a dark purple or dark brown 1963 Ford, and the car was actually parked at the rear of Walker's house in that alley. He said that he witnessed the men get out of the car, walk up to the property line, and in his words, they were smoking the place over. When the men returned to the car, Surrey followed them. He said there were no license plates on the car, front or rear. So whoever these men were, they were taking a risk, as it was actually an offence to drive without any license plates. Surrey eventually lost the men when he was following them. He essentially told the same story when he was interviewed by the Warren Commission on the 16th of June 1964. He did alter the date of the incident and said that he saw the 2 men on the Monday, which was the 8th of April. He provided additional information when interviewed by the FBI, and he added that when the men left their car to inspect Walker's house, he actually approached their vehicle, opened the car door, looked inside, and opened the glove compartment. but he found nothing that would help identify the occupants. He did, though, provide a description of both men. On this slide on the left, we'll all be familiar with the wanted for treason leaflet. The Warren Commission actually spent a great deal of their time questioning Surrey about that leaflet. But on the right, we have the pictures that the Warren Commission showed to Robert Surrey. Garner Exhibit 1, which is Oswald handing out the pro-Castro flyers in New Orleans, and Commission Exhibit 520, which was as Oswald flanked the two police officers following his arrest. Robert Surrey was shown these two pictures, and he was very, very clear that neither of the men he saw acting suspiciously around Walker's house was Lee Harvey Oswald. So we now both have Robert Surrey and Coleman both not identifying Lee and Oswald as one of the men that they saw, and I think that's important when considering this case. Now, there's further mystery involving Robert Surrey, and it's provided in Gail Nix Jackson's book, Pieces of the Puzzle. There's a picture of the book on the left there. She tells the story of seeing an interview with Robert Surrey's eldest son, David. The interview took place in 2012 and was recorded by Alan Trent, and that interview is now on YouTube. I actually had planned to play that video as well and took it out because it just lasted a wee bit too long. But I'm glad I didn't now, because we wouldn't have heard any of it. But that's David Surrey on the right, giving this interview, and he tells a story that contradicts what his father told the Warren Commission. Actually, that Robert Surrey was at Walker's house when the shot was fired. In the interview, David recalls that they were at the Walker house with his father, his brothers, his stepsisters, and they were basically stuffing leaflets inside envelopes for Walker at the time. While they were doing this, a shot rang out, and David's dad screamed, "Everybody hit the ground," which they all did. When they realised there was no more shooting, David's father ordered his son to follow him. So apparently they then went outside, got in Robert Surrey's car, and they took off down the alley looking for the shooter or something out of the ordinary. David Surrey here, he describes his father's car as a Ford Sunliner, white with a black convertible top. After circling the area for a while, Robert Surrey then actually pulls up behind another car and gets out to speak to a man who also got out of the car. Surrey then asks the guy, "Did you get him?" And the man replied, "No, I missed." And David witnessed this exchange from the front seat of his father's car. So if this story is true, it raises a lot of questions, such as who was the man that Surrey spoke to when they went out looking for the shooter? Why did Surrey not tell the truth to the Warren Commission? Because he was obviously in the house when the shot was fired. And it also makes you think that was Surrey actually personally involved in the incident as part of a conspiracy? Was it perhaps an inside job? Now, there's been some discussion recently that one of the men seen by Walter Kirk Coleman was actually Robert Surrey. You may recall that Coleman described one of the cars he saw in the parking lot as a 1958 black over white Chevrolet. So the description is quite similar to how David Surrey described his father's car. And this was the car where the man appeared to be placing something in the back floorboards. Now, I've reservations that actually that was Robert Surrey, mainly because the timings don't align. I spoke earlier that the FBI agent said it took Coleman 2 seconds to get to his vantage point, whereas I estimated closer to around 10 seconds for the reasons I gave earlier. And I don't think there's any way that Robert Surrey could have got from the room he was in the Walker house, to his car in that amount of time. Going on David Surrey's statement in this interview, when the shot was fired, his father told everybody to hit the ground. There was then an element of time for them to realise that there was going to be no more shooting, and then he ordered his son to follow him. Now, Robert Surrey would then have had to move through the house, out into the backyard, Remember, the bullet travelled around 35 to 40 yards. He then would have had to went into the alley. Then once he was in the alley, into the parking lot and to his car. So I don't think there's any way that he could have done that in certainly not 2 seconds, and I don't even think 10 seconds. It would just take far too long to get there. So I really doubt that. I don't rule it out. I never really rule out anything in this case, but I find it very unlikely that Coleman saw Robert Surrey. Now, there is another interview on YouTube, this time with Bill Surrey, and that's David's brother. And Bill said that he wasn't at the house when the shot was fired, but they received a call just after the incident, and then they went to Walker's house. So some of that would seem to contradict what David has been saying. But there's a lot to get into here, so it's a very interesting topic and probably something for a separate presentation. But if you get the chance to see any of these interviews on YouTube, I would recommend them. Now moving on to the Walker bullet. The magic bullet CE399, that really was not the only bullet that caused controversy in the history of this case. The bullet aimed at General Walker, labelled CE573, has a similar story. We can see the mangled CE573 projectile on the right-hand side of this slide, and it's clearly a copper-jacketed bullet. But on the night the shot was fired, the officers who basically first arrived at Walker's house, who were officers Tucker and Norvell, they wrote up a report and said that, quote, the bullet which was recovered appeared to be that of a high-powered rifle and was a steel jacket bullet. 2 detectives who also arrived on the scene that night and saw the bullet, Detective Van Cleve and McElroy, they wrote up a supplementary offence report also on the 10th of April. They said that officers observed that a bullet of unknown calibre, steel jacket, had been shot through the window, piercing the frame of the window and going into the wall above the complainant's head. Within days, newspapers like the Dallas Morning News and the New York Times were reporting the bullet as being of 30.06 calibre. This quote's from the Austin American Statesman paper, dated the 11th of April, 1963, and it says, the bullet from a 30.06 rifle was fired from an alley behind the Walker house in a fashionable North Dallas district, police reported. It's likely that it was actually Detective Van Cleve who was briefing the media. On the 25th of April, 1963, 2 weeks after the incident, tests were carried out to try and identify the gun that had fired the bullet at General Walker. But experts at the Dallas Crime Lab were unable to identify the weapon that fired the bullet because of its battered condition. Now, this bullet essentially remained a steel-jacketed bullet in name from the night it was found until it was handed over to the FBI on the 2nd of December 1963 by Lieutenant Day of the Dallas Police. The FBI carried out their own tests and determined that the bullet was actually copper-jacketed. Remember that the 2nd of December was the date when the note was found inside the book delivered to the Irving Police by Ruth Payne. Now, none of that explains why 2 Dallas police officers and 2 detectives who saw and handled the bullet on the night it was fired all unambiguously referred to it as a steel-jacketed bullet. Now, they could have been mistaken, but as pointed out by Tom Graham and Benjamin Cole in an article on the Kennedys and King website from May 2023, steel-jacketed bullets were extremely rare in the 1960s, and therefore it would not be unreasonable for police officers to notice and identify the difference. With a very relaxed General Walker in this picture. I think that picture was taken the day after the shooting. I'm not sure I would be as relaxed as he is the day after a bullet had just passed my head, but there you are. But even Walker had doubts about the authenticity of CE573. He was watching the House Select Committee hearings on TV in late September 1978, and he saw a bullet displayed by the committee as CE573. And he was so concerned that he sent a kind of telegram to the Chief Counsel, G. Robert Blakey, on the 12th of September 1978. In it, he said, "The bullet before your select committee, called the Walker bullet, is not the Walker bullet. It is not the bullet that was fired at me and taken out of my house by the Dallas City Police on April 10, 1963. Walker followed up on that by writing to the US Attorney General on the 12th of February 79, and he says, "The bullet used and pictured on the TV by the US Senate G. Robert Blakey Committee on Assassinations is a ridiculous substitute for a bullet completely mutilated by such obstruction, bearing no resemblance to any unfired bullet in shape or form. I saw the hunk of lead picked up by a policeman in my house, and I took it from him, and I inspected it carefully. There is no mistake. There has been a substitution for the bullet fired by Oswald and taken out of my house." Walker eventually got some success in his inquiries when he hired a Washington-based attorney to pursue the matter. It led to the FBI retrieving the bullet from the National Archives and examining it again in June 1979. They determined that it was the same bullet that was examined by the FBI back in December 1963. They added that if the House Select Committee displayed or referred to CE573 as the Walker bullet during their hearings in September 1978, then they were correct and General Walker was simply mistaken. But there are other problems with CE573.
Scott, could you just go back to that slide, the Walker photograph, please?
Yeah.
Do you think on his right arm, that's evidence of minor injuries, one by the elbow and one on the forearm? Because I can't remember which side he was sitting.
Yeah, he said it was his right arm that was injured.
Well, that definitely looks like minor injuries there.
That looks like
it does.
On his shirt as well.
Yeah, you can see a little mix, can't you? Just nothing too significant, but yeah, it definitely looks like. I don't know if he's got his sleeve rolled up to try and
show it. Yeah,
show the injury, but yeah, it was certainly the right arm, and there does look to be little minor cuts there.
And that would have come from the splinters from the window frame, would it?
Maybe, or bullet.
Either that or fragments of the bullet. Yeah.
See, this is the issue with this being an inside job and a setup to gain publicity. One could argue it's quite dangerous to do that if it goes terribly wrong.
Yeah.
Unless those injuries are, self-made and have nothing to do with the shot through the window, and they did it in some other fashion.
I can readily believe somebody was having a hot shot.
I mean, what do you think about that, Scott? This whole idea of an inside job and him taking the risk of potential injury that's much more serious than that.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier on, I never rule anything out in this because nobody really knows all the facts. But I've always been more inclined to think it wasn't. It was a genuine shot.
Mm.
I mean, you wouldn't have wanted to be in the room if the shot was fired, but somebody said, fire a bullet, but it's just going to whiz by your head by a couple of inches. I think I would rather be somewhere else in the house than wanting that to play out. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense that, he would have minor injuries. But I mean, it's one of these things where we really don't know. But if I had to put money on it, I would say it was a genuine shot.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you.
But incompetence. I mean, if you're trying to assassinate someone, how do you miss short distance?
The light's on.
The
gun is rested, and it's much shorter than the.
You're not shaking.
It's
much shorter than the limo shot from the TSVD. Yeah, I mean, this was the best shot ever.
And they're using a much better rifle.
Also, we've only got Walker's word for it. They only just missed his head. He might not even have been in the room.
No, he probably wasn't lying about that, and it wouldn't make any difference. evidence to the.
Well, then he wouldn't, if it was an inside job, he wouldn't be in any danger.
Yeah.
There's no other witness to him being in the room. Apart from Walker.
Well, it would be a dodgy thing to do anyway as a side job. I suspect that there were other people who didn't like Walker, and Oswald was far from alone in that.
Okay. Press on.
Yeah, I mean, I've never fired a rifle in my life, but it does seem to be a pretty straightforward shot with a kind of straight trajectory. The rifle was leaning on the fence. Walker was lit up like a firework in the house, but it missed.
You've actually been on site. You've been in that alleyway, haven't you? And
I have, yeah. Yeah, it just seems unlikely that the person would miss. But what do I know? Never fired a rifle in my life. But compared to what Oz was supposed to have done 7 months later, it does beg the question about how would somebody miss at Walker. Just quickly going back to CE 573. This is testimony that Lieutenant Day of the Dallas Police gave to the Warren Commission on the 7th of May 1964. And I'll just draw your attention to, he's been questioned by David Bellin, and he basically is saying, I've put it and highlighted it in red, yes, sir, the slug has my name, Day, scratched in it. He was very clear about how he has marked the bullet when he was given it by, or before he passed it over to the FBI. This is an FBI report dated the 3rd of July 1979. It was written shortly after they re-examined the bullet for the House Select Committee. And I've just highlighted a bit there in red where it says the N, B, J and D may refer to Dallas police officers Norvell, Brown and Lieutenant J.C. Day. The name Day was not found on the bullet during this examination, as Day just testified to the Warren Commission. And he also did say he didn't mark the bullet either with his first name or initial J. I would add as well that it was normal for Day to mark evidence with his full name or surname. The evidence box that actually stored the supposed Walker bullet that the FBI looked at to do this new examination was marked Day, as were the 3 spent hulls found on the 6th floor of the book depository. Nevertheless, the conclusion was that General Walker was simply mistaken in his recollections. Just that one little other bit of further confusion about the bullet is that on the night it was found, Officer Norvell said that he found the bullet. He passed it to Officer Brown of the crime scene search section, and actually Brown confirmed this to be the case. However, Detective McElroy said it was actually him that found the bullet and passed it to Brown. So there's just confusion all over this bullet, CE 573. I move on. How am I doing for time, Neil? Am I doing okay?
You're fine actually, because you're going to roll into lunch, and we've got quite a lot of wiggle room actually. So
okay, right. I'm not too far from the end. We can get your lunch. I'm going to talk about the Chevy and the mutilated photo. Another mystery in the case concerns a photograph that was found amongst Oswald's possessions at Ruth Payne's house that displayed the back of Walker's house. What is extra significant about this picture is that there is a car parked outside the house, that the picture has been mutilated in such a way that the license plate of the car cannot be observed. All that can be said is that the car was identified as a 1957 Chevrolet. So I've got the photograph up there. It's known as Commission Exhibit 5. Now, leaving aside whether Oswald actually took the picture, the questions I want to focus on are: why was the license plate obscured, and who did the car belong to? 4 detectives from the Dallas Homicide and Robbery Bureau were present when the photo was found. 2 did not recall ever seeing the picture, but the other 2, Detectives Stovall and Rose, they said that they did recall seeing the picture and when it was found at the Payne residence, and that the license plate had already been punched out at that time. Incidentally, Marina Oswald recalled that when she first saw this picture, the licence plate was intact. The Dallas police carried out a so-called investigation to try and work out who the car belonged to, and their conclusions seemed to point to it belonging to a volunteer worker of Walker's called Charles Clear. Although their report only said that Clear frequented the Walker residence and owned a 1957 Chevrolet. When General Walker and Robert Surrey, when they were interviewed by the Warren Commission, they did not positively identify the car as belonging to Charles Clear. Walker actually said, "I don't recognise that car." Excuse me. In October 1966, Wesley Liebler, who was an assistant counsel on the Warren Commission, he tried to find out who the car belonged to and even wrote directly to Charles Clear. And I don't know if he ever actually received a direct reply, but I did find a Dallas FBI memo dated the 21st of October 1966 that stated, quote, "Mr. Clear advised that he had no intention of answering the letter because Mr. Liebler did not give a suitable reason for his inquiry." The memo went on to state that the Dallas FBI office were in complete agreement that Liebler should not be assisted in his inquiries. That all just seems quite strange to me, why they wouldn't want to get to the bottom of that. There's been speculation that the car may have belonged to Felipe Vidal Santiago, who was an anti-Castro Cuban exile who made regular visits to Dallas. And in the book Cover Up by J. Gary Shaw with Larry Harris, the authors refer to an interview conducted with an aide of General Walker. The man said that he observed a, quote, Cuban or dark-complected man in a 1957 Chevrolet cruising slowly back and forth in front of Walker's residence. And this was only a few days before the shot was fired at General Walker. So to my knowledge, the owner of the car has never been definitively identified. And if Oswald did actually take the picture, could it have actually been part of some surveillance that he was carrying out for a government agency? Was the picture mutilated to protect an informant? There has never really been a satisfactory explanation given for the missing license plate. The mystery deepened when the Dallas police chief at the time of the assassination, Jesse Curry, published a memoir in 1969. On page 113 of the book, and I know you've got it, so you can have a look, you can look it up. There was a picture called Exhibit Number 55. This was of some of Lee Harvey Oswald's possessions, including personal records and photographs recovered from the Payne residence. I've got the Curry memoir, and the picture on the right of the slide is an image I took of page 113 and Exhibit Number 55. The red arrow has been added by me, but it points directly to the controversial photograph that we've just looked at. The issue here is that the picture looks different to Commission Exhibit 5, in that the area where the licence plate was punched out looks to be intact. We can't make out a licence number, but this discrepancy has been pointed out by researchers over many years and caused much controversy. The allegation being that when the Dallas police initially found the picture at Ruth Payne's house, it could not have been mutilated and the licence plate must have been punched out at a later time, was evidence therefore being tampered with. This is a blow-up of that area made by myself. I appreciate it's not very high-tech. I did the best with the limited equipment I had. The red arrow has again been added by myself. Now, excuse me, other researchers have suggested that the photo published in Curry's book is the same and it has not been tampered with. They say the photo is simply lying flat on a notebook that did not have a black background. And they make the point that an analysis of a first-generation print of the photo in Curry's book, which is held by the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, shows that a tear is still visible in the same place. I haven't had the opportunity of checking out this first-generation print, so remain sceptical, but I think the jury is still out on this matter. But even if it could be confirmed that it was the same photo, it still doesn't answer the question of why the photo was damaged and whose car it was. Oswald was a lone gunman, and as we have heard earlier, the shooter left no traces of his presence in the alley, even picking up the empty cartridge shell in what must have been a very dark area. Why would he leave behind such an incriminating photograph when his wife said he burned other evidence linking him to the incident? What would be the point of obscuring the license plate if the car actually did belong to Charles Clear? He seemed to be a more benign visitor than other people who went to Walker's house. So nothing is straightforward here, but I think it is disingenuous for anyone to say that they know all the facts. I'm going to come to the end now, but I just wanted to briefly touch on somebody who we may not have heard a lot about. This guy is called Samuel Gilbert. He was a close friend of Jack Ruby and a neighbour of General Walker's at the time when the shot was fired. Gilbert lived on Avondale Avenue, and as we will see in a second, lived very close to Walker's residence. A lady by the name of Shirley Boggs McCormick Stollard gave a statement to the FBI in September 1978. Her statement formed the basis of an FBI memo dated the 13th of September 1978, which we'll look at in a second. Ms. Stollard, she first met Samuel Gilbert in 1959, but her story really revolves around her parents, Edgar and Ruby Boggs. They were Gilbert's live-in housekeepers from around 1960 onwards, and including the time when the shot was fired at Walker. This is a memo I was talking about. I'm just going to very quickly read from the bits in red because it basically summarises the story. Miss Stollard stated that she wanted to furnish information concerning a Samuel Gilbert who resided at 4344 Avondale until his death in 1964. She stated that Samuel Gilbert, who was the same approximate age as Jack Ruby, and Jack Ruby were close personal friends, related that the Gilbert family and the Rubinstein family, Jack Ruby's parents, moved from Poland to the United States together. These families moved to New York and then to Chicago, with Samuel Gilbert and Jack Ruby eventually both living in Dallas, Texas. Jack Ruby came to Gilbert's residence numerous times between 1960 and 1963, and her mother cooked dinner for them on many of those occasions. Over on the other side, she states that Gilbert's residence at 4344 Avondale was located 2 houses away from General Edwin Walker's home, located on Turtle Creek Boulevard. She advised that on the night that Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly shot at General Walker, her parents and some of the people in the neighbourhood allegedly saw a man running through the alley behind General Walker's house after the shooting. Her parents were not sure, but they thought they saw a man run into Gilbert's driveway, and the possibility exists that this man could have hidden in Gilbert's photographic darkroom. This leaves open the intriguing possibility that this individual, if indeed they saw this man, could have been working alongside the 2 men seen by Walter Kirk Coleman as part of a conspiracy. Here's a map of the area again. So down at the bottom there, I've got an arrow pointing to the Gilbert house. So basically, you come out the Gilbert house, if you take a right, walk along Avondale Avenue, then turn left, walk up Turtle Creek Boulevard, you get to General Walker's house, and as it says there, about 2 minutes. We can also see that anybody living at Gilbert's would have had a view of someone coming out of the alley and from where the shot was fired. I've just drew a blue line there again that shows you where the alley was. So they did indeed live very close to each other. It got me thinking that if Ruby visited his friend Samuel Gilbert regularly, and Miss Stollard said that he did visit Gilbert on numerous occasions between 1960 and 1963, it leaves open the possibility that Ruby also pays General Walker a visit. Surely Ruby would have known that General Walker lived just around the corner. And William Duff, did allege that he saw Ruby at General Walker's house on more than one occasion. Sadly, it didn't end well for Samuel Gilbert. He tried to raise money for his friend Jack Ruby after Ruby killed Oswald. And the statement from Ms. Stollard says that Gilbert died in 1964 by cutting his wrists during the night. He certainly seemed like someone who is worthy of further investigation. Final slide, you'll be glad to know, it's just a recap. There were no witnesses who said they saw Oswald shoot at Walker or could even identify him being around the Walker house on the night of the shooting. Nobody saw him leaving the scene carrying a rifle. Nobody saw him burying the rifle in a field he's alleged to have done. We spoke about Coleman and Surrey. Both did not identify Oswald as being one of the two men that they saw. If Oswald wrote the incriminating note, could it have had a different meaning relating to his fair play for Cuba leafleting on the streets of Dallas? We need to remember that Marina Oswald initially disclaimed any knowledge of the note. Why did 4 Dallas police officers all unambiguously refer to the Walker bullet as being steel-jacketed? Why was there a hole punched out of the picture of the 1957 Chevrolet, and who did the car really belong to? Was the assassination attempt actually an inside job or even a publicity stunt to keep Walker and his political causes in the headlines? How could a supposed marksman like Lee Oswald miss a stationary target from only 35 to 40 yards? And that concludes my presentation.
Yeah, that's great. We've got a little bit of time for questions and so forth. Can I just first ask you, how credible do you see the Surrey sons? I mean, you've got the disconnect between David and Bill. So whether they were or weren't as a family at the Walker house on the night of the shooting, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. I mean, David Surrey says in the interview that they were stuffing leaflets inside envelopes for Walker's gubernatorial run for governor of Texas, but that actually was, as we know, was in 1962. So he's obviously got that wrong. I mean, that might be something that's easy to just get confused about. If I can remember about the other brother's interview, he can't recall what the leaflets were about. He just recalls that they were putting leaflets in the envelopes. I mean, Neil, to be honest with you, I don't really know what to make of it, because one brother is saying that they were there when the shot was fired, and the other brother is saying that they weren't there when the shot was fired. So I think it's who do you believe? It was a long time ago, so recollections can get confused. But I think for me, the thing that really, for me, is as if it's the allegation that Robert Surrey, it was Robert Surrey that Walter Coleman saw in the, entering one of the cars. And I just find that unlikely, as I say, just because of the time it would have taken. For Robert Surrey to have been seen by Walter Coleman, Surrey would have to have been standing in the lane and basically standing almost at the lane entrance. So I've got no way of knowing what one of the brothers is telling the truth. I'm not saying that either of them are deliberately not telling the truth. Recollections can be different, but I just think it's kind of like new information in a way. Although the interviews are a few years old, it does raise some questions that do need maybe a bit more further investigation.
Well, didn't one of the brothers die? Wasn't he a druggie or something? Is that right?
Yeah, I think David Surrey died not long after that interview, maybe a year or two later. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, because he's the guy with the long hair that we didn't hear. Okay. What was the other question? The other question, have you got this in your files? There was a photo of the alleyway with the construction of that apartment block being built, in the background. I think on
have the finished roof on.
Yeah, on Avondale, and I I can't remember how that relevant that. Why is that relevant to the Walker shooting? Have you got that
think
photo? Or can you
Yeah,
explain?
that's because they estimated that how the building was being constructed at the point that you can see the building in the background.
Yeah.
The construction of the building was such that the picture they said would have been taken, I think, round about March '63.
Yeah.
So before the shooting, and I probably, excuse me, alleging that whoever took that photograph was planning something.
And sorry, who was in possession of that photo? Was that in Oswald's possession?
I believe that was found allegedly amongst Oswald's possessions. Yeah, if my memory serves me right,
Yeah.
I'll stand corrected on that if somebody else knows. But I think that was one of the photographs that was found amongst Oswald's possessions. Yeah.
So the implication being that he was doing some reconnaissance for this shooting a month later.
Yeah, but there's a whole other avenue around the Imperial reflex camera. And did Michael Payne own an Imperial reflex camera? Could Michael Payne have been taking those photographs? I mean, it's just assumed that it was Oswald. I think we've always got to dig a little bit deeper. Everybody would like to think it was Oswald, and it may well have been him, but I don't think we can really say that with 100% certainty.
I have a couple questions. Mike Dworetsky here. Number one, Oswald knew a fair amount of photography, and he did his own darkroom work, as I recall. So I'm wondering whether he ever retained his negatives of these things. Were any negatives found among the possessions in the house?
It's a question where negatives found of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oswald pictures.
Yeah.
One of the investigations I read about in the House Select Committee investigation was experts who identified that some of the pictures of Oswald or taken by Oswald or Marina were taken with his camera because they could identify the frame of the negative to little defects in the metal of the frame inside of the camera. So presumably they found some negatives.
Mike, to my knowledge, I've in the research I've done on this case, I haven't read or seen anything that would indicate that they found negatives. That's not to say that there weren't negatives. I've just not seen or read anything that said that they did.
Okay, it does seem curious to me that Oswald, as a keen photographer and developer of his own film and pictures, would have thrown away the negatives because they can always be used again if you need them. And they're not very big, you can file them away. I have filed some negatives at home. And 30 years later, I scanned some of them and found that I could see details that I couldn't see on the print. Interesting. Okay, that was the first question. The second question, if I may, I assume you're familiar with Alaric Rossman's article about the Walker bullet.
Whose article, sorry?
Alaric Rossman.
Long-standing DPUK member.
Oh, right, yeah, no, yeah,
Right, and he wrote an article about the Walker bullet and how essentially the same things that you have said, but he also used Walker's description of the bullet that was found to make a sort of mashup photo of what Walker was describing. Didn't have an actual picture of it in his article, but he had a picture of his sort of photographic mashup of what Walker was describing. And of course, you're right, it wasn't anything like the exhibit shown when they started using Oswald and having taken the shot. So I just thought I'd ask if you were familiar with that one.
I'd have to go back and revisit the article, which I'll probably do now, Mike, now that you highlight it. Sorry?
3 years ago, 4 years ago,
Yeah.
I can't.
Is that the Echo?
Pre-COVID.
It was in the Echo.
In the Echo,
Pre-COVID, it would have been.
I mean, what I've always found quite strange is that the Dallas police haven't presented any pictures of the bullet I mean, it was in their possession from the night of the incident through to early December, and there's never been any photographs produced or whatever of that bullet. I mean, that could solve this mystery pretty quickly if we could see what they had as opposed to what the FBI had. And I'm always loath to kind of cast aspersion on individuals, but some of the people who were involved in the handling of the Walker bullet were also involved in the handling of the original magic bullet, Hardwell Odom and people like that. So, you know, without casting aspersions on their professional integrity or whatever, you know, they don't have a great track record in handling, you know, the bullets in these cases.
Paul Blow's got a question.
Hey, Scott.
Hi, Paul.
How you doing?
I'm okay, thanks.
All right. Scott, an alleged potential patsy for an incident in San Antonio, a guy called Harry Power. There's a police officer in Indiana who knew about the Harry Power case and everything, and he says that Harry Power, he is certain, was investigated for threats or making an attempt on Walker.
Oh,
and I was wondering if you knew about that. You could find that in my article about prior plots, which seems to be, once again, you know, sort of a guiding hand, right? You know, coming up with something going on. I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
Paul, thanks for asking that. And actually, no, I don't. That is the first time I've heard that name, Harry Power.
Harry Power.
Yeah, is that Power?
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Richard K. Snagell talks
Yeah.
about Harry Power in his book,
Uh-huh.
The Man Who Knew Too Much. And it's covered in a fourth decade article by, anyway, I have all the links in the article, but I found that very interesting. You know, first of all, they're all tainted Fair Play for Cuba committee or communists.
Mhm.
Yeah, that interesting thing that he took an, you know, he's certain he made an attempt on, was investigated for that. It is loose, you know, but I thought I'd mention that.
Scott, could you just, I know people can go away and read all of these articles, but could you just clarify the bullet issue again, the 573 bullets? So you were saying in the 30s that that's when there was that's where you would most likely find steel jacketed bullets.
Mhm.
By the 60s, they were copper jacketed bullets. And am I right in thinking that even the steel jacketed bullets had some copper in them?
I mean, I'm not a ballistics expert. I mean, most of what I've picked up on the bullets is what I've read and tried to research myself. So there may well have been some copper within those steel jacketed bullets, but I mean, Dallas was a, you know, I think that, you know, that there was a lot of crime at the time, and I think the police officers investigating crimes in Dallas in the early 1960s. My understanding is that the majority of the evidence that they found, bullets, etc., would be copper jacketed bullets. That they were the norm. So to find a steel jacketed bullet would have been something that was a bit more unique, and they would therefore have, you know, been able to identify the thought, oh, that bullet looks different to what we're used to finding. The makeup of these bullets, I have to confess, Neil, there's no point me sitting here saying I'm an expert. I'm not. There may be experts out there who can, you know, who can speak to that better than me.
You referenced Jeremy Cole.
Yeah, Tom Graham. They did a good article for the Kennedy's King website a few months ago that I would encourage people to have a look at.
because I think Jeremy Commons made some significant contribution on this on the Ed Forum. I think there's threads on the Ed Forum, and that might be worth looking at as well.
Yeah,
I just seem to recall that there may have been some copper in the steel jacketed bullets.
Maybe.
Yeah. But I guess your point is ultimately it's implausible that they can mix up a steel and a copper bullet. Okay, just a couple of other things, because then we need to move on. You referenced Robert Barrett when you thought he was being disingenuous in the 2 seconds to get to the fence.
Mm-hmm.
He's another character that is a potential bad actor. He's the guy that is possibly the guy picking up what looks like a bullet in the infield of Dealey Plaza with Buddy Waters, Roger Craig, and the other policeman, Foster, I think it was, around him. He's also the guy
Jensen Patton, wasn't he?
Patton with the wallet find, with Croy, Westbrook, Doughty, etc., where Ron Rayland filmed that footage. He's also at the Texas Theatre arrest as well. So it's just interesting that he pops up with this statement at the Walker shooting scene.
Yep. Yeah, I'm aware it's the same. It's the same Robert Barrett. He is quite ubiquitous. He appears everywhere in this case.
He does. And finally, I mean, you did reference the Jesse Curry book, and I was looking for that photo when you were talking about it. We have got this here for sale, and it's a signed copy, and it is a good book. So I don't know if anyone's already put their name against it.
Oh, Jesse Curry signed it. Yeah,
we've got a signed one. Do you want it?
I wouldn't mind. Yeah, if it's a signed copy. Yeah.
Does anyone put their name down for it? Because I'll bring it to Dallas if you want.
Just mail it to him.
I'd love to have it as a signed copy. Yeah.
Does anybody put it?
No, that's one. I'll take the name off. No,
are you sure?
Yeah.
You're talking about the
Just 1 second. There may be a trade query here. Hang on. Have you put your name?
No.
You have not put your name.
No.
Not £10. It's a signed copy. It is worth more. They're all worth more.
No, I'd have to. I mean, I think it's a rare book. I'd have to check.
Well, I have
one of these online book sales websites to see how much they actually.
Well, they're all worth a lot more. All of the books here are worth a lot more. Yeah. So Tony, are you stepping down on that?
Yes.
You are. Okay. I'll bring it to Dallas when I see you.
That's great. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, there's one more question. There's one more question.
Okay.
Matt. Yeah. Hi, Scott. About the bullet, unfortunately. Am I right in thinking the Commission Exhibit 573 bullet was identified as a 3006?
That was
I don't think it was. I think they struggled to confirm the caliber of it, but they basically were basically linking it to the Malika Carcano.
I think on the slide where you show the Commission Exhibit photograph, I think it mentions it there. I don't know if you've got that slide.
See,
yeah, the identification was in a newspaper article somewhere, but I don't know the source of the. We don't know the source of the identification.
Oh yes, it was from the newspaper.
But we don't know how the newspaper got the information.
No, it don't. But it does beg the question. 3006 is 7.62, and Oswald, the man like had 6.5. So if Oswald had access to a 3006 caliber rifle, why did he go to all the trouble of ordering a man like a Kakuna? And did the police, assuming the newspaper got that 3006 from a policeman, how did the police or the Warren Commission square the fact that Oswald possibly had another rifle?
They did. They weren't interested in contradictory questions. They knew what they wanted to happen. We went down that road.
Same as the Bowser identification, isn't it? It's just wrong.
Yeah, but somebody in the police, they had the bullet, they looked at it and said, yeah, it's 3006. And so he told the reporter this probably over drinks at the Carousel Club while watching Kathy Kay strip off.
We have to wrap it up, Mike, because they've just called us in for lunch.
Sure. Sorry about the outburst.
No worries. Scott, thank you very much indeed. That was another thorough presentation, really enjoyable. And I'm okay to distribute this to the society?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I will. I'll be in touch with you next month. We'll probably do a Zoom regarding the people that are going to Dallas.
Yeah.
Okay. Take care.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Hang on,
No,
Scott.
no,
Hang on.
Scott can go.
Okay.
Thanks,
Okay.
Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Okay, now what I want you to do is go to share screen, click on the up arrow.
So we're filming still. We're still recording.
Oh, do I stop recording?
That's what.
Sorry.
Yeah, someone visiting on that email.